The snow came down hard enough to erase edges, curbs, corners. The neat geometry of downtown Chicago blurred into white. David Mitchell stepped out his Mercedes, and the car's heat died on his skin like a dream. Wind knifed between high rises and brought with it the tinny clatter of a loose sign somewhere, an off-key bell ringing over an empty block. He pulled his cashmere coat tighter, checked the time, and told himself not to think about the anniversary. He saw her before the valet did. A tiny bundle beside the brick flank of Santos, knees to chest, chin to knees, a cheap pink jacket gone gray with slush. The snow stuck to her hair. The kid wasn't crying. That was the worst part. She was just bracing. David stopped for one breath. His mind put his daughter's face where the girl should be. Brown hair, that gap-toothed grin, a paper crown from the Italian place on Clark, and the memory struck so cleanly he had to blink to steady himself. No, not tonight. He crouched, the way you do when you don't want to tower. Hey there, sweetheart. You must be freezing. His breath made ghosts between them. Big eyes, the color of coffee before cream. I'm okay, mister. Not okay. Her lips were blue. What's your name? Emma. Emma Carter. The words shivered. Emma, I'm David. He put a gloved hand out, then thought better of it and pulled back, palms up to show he wasn't going to touch without permission. Is your mom inside? She's working. Emma's glance skittered toward the high glass doors of the office tower across the street. She said to wait. The shelters were full. It's just for a little while. How long is a little while? A shrug. The wind did the rest, shaking her small frame. David mapped Hartman Tower in his head. The security desk, the midnight janitorial crew, the unkind budget lines that shaved their hours, their benefits, their margins for someone else's bonus. He had signed those kind of contracts once upon a time. He hated that he knew how the math worked. You want to come inside with me? He nodded towards Santos' warm, golden windows. They make the best hot chocolate in the city. You can call your mom from my table. Emma hesitated. The mantra recited by 1,000 good mothers between her and any stranger. Mom says don't talk to. Your mom is right, David said softly. But I'll stay where you can see me. We can call her from inside. You're going to get hurt if you stay out here. Silence stretched. Finally, she nodded once, like a decision costing courage. He offered his arm as a rail. She used it without leaning on him, proud even in misery. Her glove was soaked through. He felt the cold through cashmere. Inside, Sano swallowed them whole. Steam, garlic, laughter. Antonio, the maitre d', clocked David with polished warmth, then saw the child and went very still. Mr. Mitchell, he said, lowering his voice instinctively. Your usual? 2 menus and the sweetest hot chocolate you can make. David tipped his head toward Emma. Extra whipped cream. They took a corner banquette. Emma perched on the edge like a sparrow on a wire, afraid to smudge the white linen. Her eyes kept flicking to the chandelier, to the silver, to the families. She looked both spellbound and braced for someone to tell her she didn't belong. It's okay, David said, gentler than he'd been with anyone in months. You can sit back. This table belongs to you as long as you're at it. What do I do with this? She held up the heavy napkin, like it might be a prop in a test. You put it on your lap, like this. He demonstrated. She mimicked, pleased by the small correctness of it. The hot chocolate came, monumental, crowned in white. Emma's eyes widened in a way that lit her whole small face. Is this for me? All yours. She wrapped both hands around the mug, as if cupping a fire. The first sip made her close her eyes. For a heartbeat, she looked exactly like a child should, transported by sweetness. 2nd grade? David asked, catching the rainbow sticker on her jacket. What do you like? Reading, drawing, math. The last a little shy, like a secret she wasn't sure he'd respect. Good choices. He tried to keep his voice level, but memories stirred. Bedtime chapters of Charlotte's Web, a coloring page of a lopsided butterfly taped to his office wall for too long. Favorite book? Charlotte's Web, she said quickly, as if the answer mattered. I've read it 4 times. We got it at a garage sale for 50 cents. It's my only one. But I read it slow sometimes so it lasts longer. He swallowed. It's a good one to last. The cough came out of nowhere, a wrenching, racking thing that folded her over the mug. She pressed a napkin to her mouth and blinked fast to stop the tears coughing always brings. There were flecks of red on the linen when she lowered it. The world narrowed to that white square. How long? David asked, keeping the calm in his voice he used with panicked engineers and frightened board members. A few days. She pressed her fist against her ribs. It's just a cold. He flagged Antonio with the kind of look that moved things. Mouthed, doctor. Then, careful, where is your mom cleaning tonight? Hartman Tower. 20th floor. She says don't use the elevators alone. Your mom is smart. She is. Fierce pride in a thin voice. Finish as much as you can, he said, standing. We're going to see her. They crossed the lobby at Hartman, and the security guard who had once chased David's teenage self away from a similar desk looked up at his badge, then at Emma in his shadow, and waved them through without a word. The elevator climbed. Emma coughed. He could feel the heat rolling off her even through the cold damp. They found Sarah Carter on her knees, gloved hands red raw, scrubbing scuff marks from baseboards as if effort itself could make the math work. She was 20-something. Hair yanked back in a ponytail that used to be style for pictures, cheekbones that hadn't seen enough food. She could have been pretty if exhaustion weren't wearing her like a mask. Mom, Emma breathed, both relief and apology. Sarah's head snapped up. For a second, relief flooded her face. Then she took in David's coat, the building, the way Emma clung to the napkin like a talisman. Her eyes sharpened. Emma, I told you to wait. The cough cut her daughter in half. This time the blood wasn't a fleck. It was a thread. Everything in Sarah changed at once. The flame of anger inverted into the coldness of terror. Oh, baby. She gathered Emma close, then held her at arm's length to search her face. Since when? Okay, Emma whispered and swayed. David stepped closer and kept his hands open, palms visible, the posture of a supplicant, not a savior. Children's Memorial is 10 minutes from here. Let me. We don't have insurance. The words ripped out. The clinic's booked 2 weeks, and I know the chief of pediatrics. He heard the arrogance in that and softened it. I can get her seen now. No paperwork. No questions. Please. Sarah's jaw worked. Pride and fear did battle in the space between breaths. Why? The question was clean and honest. Why would you help us? David looked at Emma, who was trying to sit up straighter, so her mom wouldn't worry. He looked at the woman who had scrubbed enough floors to have the bones of her hands printed in chemical burns and still had the spine to question him. He thought of a Tuesday afternoon 15 years ago, of sirens and a phone call that never stopped ringing. Because once, he said, someone didn't get to my daughter in time. I can't fix that, but I can fix this. Please. Sarah searched him for the trap. She would have found one in most men like him. She found grief instead, sharp and uncloaked. If we do this, she said, the formality of a contract in her voice, it's a loan. I pay back every penny, even if it takes forever. Whatever makes you comfortable. They made the drive with Emma cradled in Sarah's arms in the back seat. The city a smear of red brake lights and white fury. The ER doors parted like a stage curtain. Names were said. Hands moved. Monitors beeped. Within minutes, Emma was cocooned in warm blankets, a nasal cannula whispering oxygen, and securing a promise. Dr. Morrison introduced herself with a steadiness that calmed the air around her. Pneumonia, she said, not sugarcoating, not dramatizing. But we've caught it. She's young and strong. We'll hit it hard. Sarah sagged into a chair like someone had cut a string. David stood because he didn't know how to sit with that much adrenaline still in his bones. The next hours were a succession of small mercies, the oxygen levels creeping up on the monitor, the fever dropping a notch, the way Emma's hand relaxed under her mother's fingers. At 3 a.m., the hospital got quiet in the way only hospitals can, full of hums and hidden labor. Sarah sat with her head against the plexiglass side of the bed, the kind of posture you only make when there's nothing left in the tank but but the need to stay. David brought her water. She took it without looking at him. "You can go," she murmured. "You've done enough. I'll head out when she's settled." He meant it. He also didn't know how to leave. After dawn, with Emma dozing and color finally back under her skin, Dr. Morrison returned with a small smile. "She's responding. We're not out of the woods, but we're walking toward the edge." Sarah laughed a wet, incredulous sound that made David's throat burn. "She's going to ask for pancakes in about 5 minutes," she warned. "Pancakes we can handle." The doctor patted the foot of the bed and slipped out. They watched Emma breathe. They watched the city pink itself through the window. Eventually, Sarah spoke. "What do you want from us?" She didn't turn her head. No stories. The truth. David thought about all the versions of himself he'd been. The kid with a fake internship badge stealing time at old computers. The man who built a company on 4 hours of sleep and stubbornness. The father who failed to keep a promise because some stranger failed to keep a law. He thought about the way Emma had looked at a mug of hot chocolate, like it was a miracle and a promise both. "I want to help," he said, "and I want to earn your trust, not buy it." Those are different verbs. Finally, she looked at him. Most men don't know that. He nodded, accepting the verdict. "My company needs a facilities manager. Nights. Benefits. A 2-bedroom in the company building comes with it. You'd answer to our head of operations, not me. If you don't want it, fine. If you do, it's yours because you'll be good at it, not because of this." He gestured softly to Emma, to the monitors, the blankets. Sarah stared at him a long time, as if she could see the outlines of the offer in the air and measure the weight of the strings that weren't attached. "If I take it," she said, "I pay back the hospital bills. Every dollar. Slow if I have to. Okay. And you don't make decisions for U.S. without asking me first. Not with money. Not with anything. Okay." Silence again, but warmer now. Emma shifted, squinted toward them, and smiled the sleepy, crooked smile of a child who recognizes her people. "Mom," she whispered. "Pancakes." Sarah's eyes flooded. "You heard the lady," David said, already moving. "On it." He stepped into the corridor to call in favors. Nutrition, housing, HR. He said please more than he said his name. When he came back with a tray, Emma was sitting up, hair mess, cannula still in, dignity fully restored. She eyed the pancakes like a general inspecting troops. "Thank you," she told him carefully. Every syllable a choice. "You're welcome." He meant it for more than breakfast. By afternoon, paperwork had the shape of a new life. An employee badge with Sarah's picture, an apartment key with a brass fob stamped MT, a calendar of follow-up appointments. David left them to rest with a promise to return the next morning and stepped into the winter brightness, feeling wrung out and strangely light. His phone buzzed. His assistant, James, had sent a single-line text. "We need to talk. Urgent." In the mirrored elevator doors, David caught his own reflection. A man with snow still melting in his hair, hospital smell clinging to his coat, and something unguarded in his eyes he hadn't seen in years. He pocketed the phone without replying. For the first time in a very long time, the next meeting could wait. Outside, the city kept snowing. Inside, on a pediatric floor that hummed with beeps and cartoons, a girl who liked math in Charlotte's Web fell asleep with a stuffed hospital bear tucked under her arm. Her mother watched the rise and fall of her chest like a prayer answered in installments. And in an office high above Michigan Avenue, a man who had once believed wealth was a fortress realized he had been wrong. Sometimes it was just a door, one you could open for someone else. The snow backed off overnight, leaving the city glazed and dangerously beautiful. Morning light spilled across the pediatric floor, soft as a promise. Emma woke hungry and opinionated about pancake thickness. Sarah woke with a knot between her shoulder blades that felt like a habit. By noon, discharge papers had a shape, follow-ups were scheduled, and a volunteer had smuggled in a stack of children's books. The worst was over, Dr. Morrison said with the calm of someone who had earned the right to be believed. By sunset, a sedan from Mitchell Technologies slid to the curb outside Children's. Sarah sat in the back with Emma, both of them still smelling faintly of hospital soap. David rode up front, fielding calls with the volume off. When Emma pointed out the skyline like it was a new constellation, he angled a mirror so he could see her face as she named buildings. The company's residential tower rose from the riverfront like a promise someone could keep. The apartment on the 15th floor was simple and bright. 2 bedrooms, a galley kitchen, a wall of glass that turned the night into a glittering map. Someone had thought to stock the fridge. Someone had set a stuffed rabbit on a child-sized pillow. Emma crossed a window and pressed both hands to the glass as if she could feel the city's pulse. Sarah stood very still in the entryway, taking inventory. Locks, sight lines, the way sound traveled. When she finally turned to David, she didn't say thank you. She said, "Where's the light leaking?" It took him a beat to realize she meant, "What's the catch?" "There isn't," he said. He kept his hands in his pockets, so she couldn't see the way his fingers wanted to fidget. "Keys are yours. Lease is in your name. Job is HR's to manage, not mine. You answer to operations, not to me." She weighed the words. "And the hospital bill?" "A ledger between us," he said. "On your terms. Slow if you need slow." Something in her shoulders let go a fraction. Emma turned from the glass. "Do we live here now?" "If you want," Sarah said. "I want," Emma decided, as if voting might sway the building itself. She wandered room to room, narrating. "This one's mine. That corner is reading. The rabbit's name is Pancake." The apartment took the sound of her voice and kept it. They ate noodles cross-legged on the floor, because the table had not yet arrived. Emma's cannula was gone, the rasp in her chest now a whisper. She fell asleep on a nest of blankets with Charlotte's Web open on her belly. On his way out, David paused at the door. Sarah stood in the kitchen with her hands braced on the counter, eyes closed, breathing like someone who had been underwater a long time. "Tomorrow," he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't open her eyes. Tomorrow, the new life began with checklists, HR badges, facilities rounds, a laminated sheet of emergency protocols on a hook by the door. Sarah learned the building the way people learn a route to safety, stairwell numbers and camera blind spots, which elevators stuck between floors when humidity lied. By the end of her first week, she could have walked the 40 stories in the dark. Emma spent afternoons in a corner of the small office David had given Sarah on the service level. She did homework under a task lamp and kept score of the adults who came and went. She assigned them secret names based on how they carried themselves. The Whistler, a night guard who sang off-key. Coffee with too much sugar, a junior accountant with a halting laugh. The lady who wears rain in her perfume. Operations chief, hair neat even in wind. When David appeared, she called him by his name like it belonged to her. He brought books with the reverence of a priest bearing sacraments. On Friday, the first storm cleared to a blue that felt like an apology. David worked late on the 38th floor, a wall of glass behind him, making the city feel like something he could still hold. James Thompson materialized his doorway with a manila folder and a face that had perfected concerned neutrality. "We should talk," James said, closing the doors of the room needed to be sealed. "Optics." David didn't look up from the spreadsheet. He was annotating. "I'm not interested in optics. I'm interested in maintenance budgets not being treated like a suggestion." James placed a folder on the desk and slid it forward with a finger. "Then you'll be interested in this. I've already put out a few fires, but rumors move faster than emails. People are talking about favoritism, about your involvement with an hourly employee, about the apartment. People," David said flatly, "should find better hobbies." James hesitated, then smiled like a man being reasonable. "I pulled together a memo for the board. Clean narrative, clear boundaries. You'll want to stay ahead of it." David skimmed the opening paragraph. The wording was so careful it drew blood. "In light of recent charitable activity involving a member of our evening staff." He closed the folder. "No, David. No memos. No narratives. We are a company. We pay for competence. We gave a qualified person a job. If the board wants to talk ethics, I'll talk ethics." James let his hands spread. "A performance of surrender. You pay me to anticipate problems. I'm anticipating one." David thought about telling him to go home. He thought about Emma, a book propped on her knees. mouthing along to the words she knew by heart. "Anticipate quietly," he said, "and send security the latest badge audit. Sarah wants to review access levels on the contractor log." "Of course," James said. The smile didn't meet his eyes. "I'll handle it." The fire alarm didn't sound like danger. It sounded like testing, polite, almost apologetic. On the residential floors, the lights blinked, then flooded white. A recorded voice began the choreography it had rehearsed on quiet Tuesdays. "Please proceed to the nearest stairwell. Do not use elevators. This is not a drill." Sarah's radio crackled on her hip. 15th floor, possible electrical odor in the trash room, a guard reported, adrenaline flattening his voice. "Alarms active. No visible flame." "Copy," Sarah said. "Already moving. Start evacuation. I'm en route." She did a mental sweep of the floor, names, apartment numbers, who used a walker, who slept with earplugs. She banged on doors as she ran. A teenager opened one with a game controller still in his hand. She assigned him 2 apartments to check and watched him stand up straighter at the job. "Mom!" he shouted over his shoulder. "We're helping." At her door, Emma stood in socks with a backpack strapped on, eyes wide but steady. "Drill voice," she said, as if stating a weather pattern. "Is it real?" "Real enough," Sarah said, kneeling to zip up boots with hands that were steadier than they felt. "We're going to stairs A. What do we do?" "Left hand on rail. Don't run, listen." Emma's voice was small and precise. She glanced past her mother down the hall. "Where do the cats live?" "Man on 12 has 2, Sarah said. "Security will get them. You know what our job is. We get down and we help." "That's right." They hit the stairwell as a tide of bodies began to move. The building's bones thrummed, a low hum that traveled through steel when systems woke. In the press of people, Sarah counted breaths. She counted heartbeats. She counted the doors they passed. Emma kept a hand on the rail, and one on Pancake the rabbit's ear sticking out of her pack. 5 flights down, a woman faltered, and someone took her arm, and someone else made room. For 3 minutes, the floor's worth of strangers became a single organism that knew how to leave without breaking itself. On 3, the air sharpened. The smell of hot plastic turned the recorded voice into something Sarah trusted less. "Keep moving," she said, and the group did. They spilled out into the service drive in a rattle of boots and breath. The night was bright with strobes. 2 engines bracketed the curb, lights painting the glass a sick carnival red. Sarah counted again. Faces, familiar haircuts. The man from 12 cradling a cat carrier and swearing that he'd never again leave the zipper unlatched. "Emma," she said, a reflex even when her daughter was glued to her hip. "Here." Emma held up 3 fingers. "I counted 3 dogs in costumes." Of course she did. A guard jogged up with a clipboard. "Trash room motor overheated," he said. "No flame, just smoke and dramatics. FD's clearing now. 10 minutes to all clear." Sarah let out a breath she hadn't admitted she'd been holding. She turned to squat in front of Emma. "You did perfect. When we get upstairs, we—" Her voice cut. The crowd thinned just enough for a hole to open, and in that hole a shape formed. A man too thin in a too big coat, hair combed with fingers that shook. He had the jittery energy of poorly managed sobriety and the eyes of someone looking for purchase on a slope. He was already moving toward them. "Sarah," he said, trying to make the name soft. It came out blunt. "Sarah." Emma froze. Her hand tightened around Rabbit's ear until the fabric pinched. Mark Carter smiled like he was remembering how. "Hey, Bug." Sarah stood to her full height without thinking, placing herself in front of Emma, so quickly it looked like the motion had been rehearsed for years. "You need to leave." "I came to see my daughter." "You don't have a daughter here." His gaze flicked over the engines, the guards, the kind of property he'd only seen from outside. Fancy place. So this is where the charity lives. He looked around, found a face he recognized from the news, and let his lips curl. And this is the man who pays for it. David had arrived at a jog. Jack had forgotten in some hallway. He took in the tableau in a heartbeat. Mark too close. Sarah rigid, Emma small and calculating. The The way children get when they're triaging which adult to believe. He pulled up 3 paces away, hands visible and empty. Is there a problem? He asked the air, not the man. Not if you keep your checkbook in your pocket. Mark said, loud enough for the nearest 3 conversations to falter. I don't need your handouts. I need my family. You left your family, Sarah said. The words were gritted stone. We survived. Mark ignored her. People like him often did. He aimed for David like a man who'd found the source of his grievance and wanted to curse it at the root. You think you can buy what I had? You think you can step in with your car and your suit and your security? David said without looking away, voice pitched to carry just far enough. A guard he knew by first name materialized. Mr. Carter is trespassing. We'll keep it calm. That's right, Mark said, bitter triumph lighting up his face. Call your guys. Show her who you really are. Muscle in suits. Sarah's radio crackled with the all clear. The crowd began to coil back toward the doors. The moment wobbled, unsteady on its axis. Emma stepped out from behind her mother before anyone could stop her. Her chin came up with stubborn precision that matched Sarah's and, in some old photos, David's daughter's. She looked at Mark with a seriousness that bent men. I'm not going with you, she said. Her voice didn't shake. I don't know you. My mom knows me. Mr. David knows me. You don't. Mark flinched like someone had slapped him. Anger found him as grief stepped aside. You hear that? He spread his arms as if the building were a jury. That's what money buys. Forgetting. No, Emma said. Staying by is remembering. David felt a line of decision present itself. The easy path he'd taken before, the expensive shortcut, the way out smoothed by numbers with many zeros. He could make Mark disappear with a signature and a cashier's check and a lawyer with sharp teeth. He had done it for boardroom threats. He had done it for his own peace. He had done it when panic made his hands shake. Sarah's warning from the hospital waited like a compass in his chest. Don't make decisions for us. He put his hands up, palms out, and addressed Mark as if they were the only 2 men in the street. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to call the number my security chief hands you. You're going to set a time with a family court mediator. You will meet with Sarah in a room with a third party. You will no longer appear uninvited. If you do, we file a protective order tonight. If you don't, you'll be heard like a man who wants to earn a second chance, not take one. Mark blinked. This script did not involve immediate cash. It did not give him the righteous satisfaction of rejection. You think you can put me on a schedule? I think, David said evenly, you can put yourself on one. Silence pulled tight. Sarah looked at David, at Mark, at Emma, and made a call. Do it this way, she said to Mark without taking her eyes off her daughter. If you want to be seen where it counts. If you want to be a father, start by being a man. Mark's jaw worked, the old animal brains of fight and flee both shouting. He reached into his pocket with too much speed, and 4 adults moved as one. He pulled out a flip phone. Surrender and calculation shared his face like an ill-fitting mask. Fine, he said. Mediator. We'll see how much of this family survives paperwork. He stalked away into the cold as if he'd chosen it. Emma's breath came out in a long thread. Sarah sank to her knees and pulled her in and didn't let go, face buried in hair that still smelled like hospital shampoo. David took 1 step back and then another, because the picture in front of him, mother, daughter, the small, strong circle they made, was whole without him. He stood guard without being asked. It felt like the right job. Upstairs, the building exhaled. People fetched forgotten phone chargers and laughed too loudly about nothing. The trash room motor, blackened and sullen, was wheeled away like a culprit shamed by facts. Emma drew 3 dogs in costumes in the margin of a fire safety pamphlet and titled it Evacuation, but make it fashion. Sarah taped the pamphlet, art upgrade and all, inside a cupboard. When Emma finally fell asleep face down on her own pillow, Sarah stepped out into the hall and closed the door with exaggerated care. David was waiting in the small living room, jacket back on, hair still damp at the temples from sweat or melted snow. You didn't pay him, she said. I thought about it, he admitted, every step down those stairs. You didn't. He spread his hands. You asked me not to make decisions for you. I didn't. Something in her face almost softened. You offered him a path I can live with, she said, which is not the same as offering him money. I'm learning my verbs, he said, aiming for light. You're learning, she allowed. A beat. He nodded toward the bedroom. She was good. She's been practicing brave for a long time. Pride and sadness twined in Sarah's voice. I wish he didn't have to. He wanted to say, not anymore. He wanted to promise things that were not his to promise. The old, easy sentences, I'll keep you safe, I'll make it simple, rose to his tongue like muscle memory. He swallowed them. Tomorrow, he said instead, HR does your benefits onboarding. Operations has your route. I'll be somewhere else. Good, she said, and he knew it was. He reached for the door, then paused. Can I leave something? He held up a thin, cloth-bound book. Field Guide to City Birds. I told her the pigeons had names. She demanded proof. A corner of Sarah's mouth moved. She liked that. He set it on the counter, like it might break if he was not careful. Good night, Sarah. Good night, David. He stepped into the hall and pulled the door softly closed. He stood with his palm against the cool metal for a second longer than a person needed to breathe, and then walked away. Half a building above, on the 38th floor, James watched the camera feed of the 15th floor corridor go dark as the motion sensor timed out. He closed a window on his monitor and opened another, a spreadsheet that wasn't a spreadsheet, a piece of software that did something money liked to do when it thought no one was looking. He ran a fingertip down an invisible seam in his plan and smiled. Fire alarms were useful for more than drills. He picked up his phone and dialed a number that never showed up on billing statements. It's moving, he said to the voice that answered. Our man is distracted. Our building is open. You have 24 hours to finish. After that, optics change. He hung up and typed 3 emails in a tone that sounded like concern. Saturday came on like a truce. Emma and Pancake took a nap in the sun patch on the living room rug. Sarah did a slow walk with operations through the guts of the building. Boiler rooms and server doors and places people forgot existed until they failed. She asked good questions. She knew which answers were rehearsed. In the afternoon, she and Emma took the train 2 stops to buy color pencils, because even in a new life some rituals insisted on keeping their shape. When they returned, a canvas tote sat just inside their door. On top, a note in an unmistakably adult handwriting. For Emma, field guide, magnifier, tiny notebook for sightings. P.S. The peregrine falcons on the river tower are not rumors. David's signature was not on it. It didn't need to be. Sunday, Sarah found a rhythm. Monday it broke. At 9:17 a.m., security pinged her radio. Facilities, this is control. We've got a maintenance override on the freight elevator. You have that scheduled. Negative, Sarah said. Which car? Freight 2. She pulled up the service tablet and watched the screen blink. The car was moving without a key, accessing floors on a permissions list that didn't exist. Lock it, she said, and call IT. Now. On 38, James's face appeared around David's door like trouble in a suit. We've got a systems hiccup, he said. Payroll servers flashed a ghost login. Harmless, most likely, but we're checking. Define harmless. Phantom pings we see after an update. He put a hand to his chest. Trust me, we're on it. 20 minutes later, the ghost moved again. This time, IT's tray snagged a thread and tugged. An access signature bloomed on the screen, one David hadn't used since before Alice died. Old credentials. Old wounds. Are you logging in from somewhere else? The IT director asked over the intercom, polite the way people are when they are pretty sure they are about to accuse you of a felony. No, David said. Someone is pretending to be you. James was instantly there with a plan and a folder and a face. We should shut everything down, he said. Lock the network. Call the authorities. If your credentials are compromised, it's not just a hiccup. It's a theft. The word made the air thinner. It also drew Sarah up from the service level like a magnet had caught the ring of keys on her belt. In the control room, screens bloomed with green lines that didn't belong. Money did what water did. When a clever engineer gave it a slope, it moved. Line items flipped flags. A tiny trickle ran under the floorboards of the company's books. Sarah stepped in and took in a room in a single sweep. She didn't understand the code. She did understand the way people stood, who leaned back from their monitors to be seen working, who leaned in to actually work, who stood too close to man with his hands on the narrative. "Explain it to me like I'm a person with a mop," she said. "Someone's trying to rob us," James said quickly, before the IT director could translate, using David's keys. Sarah looked at David. He looked back, the beginnings of a headache threading the space between his eyes. "I haven't used those credentials in years," he said. "They shouldn't even work. Unless someone revived them," James said gently. "Someone with access to legacy systems. Someone who understands floor plans and server rooms and how to be invisible." He turned the full weight of his reasonable gaze on Sarah. "Someone like facilities." The room rotated a degree. It was so subtle that only the people who knew how to trust their balance felt it. Sarah didn't move. "You're suggesting I'm suggesting you run a department that can help us find the problem." James said, "Palms up, I'm only asking. Audit your team's badges. Check your contractor list. If there's a leak in your shop, you'll want to find it first." The radio on Sarah's hip crackled again. "Control, this is Freight. We've got that override again. Cars headed to subbasement. No one inside." David pointed. "Lock the doors on SB. 2. Send security." Sarah was already moving. "On it." James's eyes tracked her out, then slid to David with a carefully curated concern. "You know how this looks," he said. "New hire, emotional involvement, old credentials. If we don't control the story." "We control the facts," David said. "Find me the leak." The freight doors on SB, 2 open on a corridor that smelled like old concrete and colder air. Sarah's breath clouded. She took the last stretch of the run, keys jangling a bright metallic urgency. Security fell into step behind her, bulk and radios and the kind of good men who like having straightforward jobs. The freight car stood still now, a big dumb animal that pretended it hadn't misbehaved. "Camera 3, Sarah said into her radio. "Angle on the car." "Up," Control replied. The monitor on the wall flickered. The car was empty. The hallway was empty. The air felt wrong. "Door 2, she said, and a guard swung it open. Server room. Blue light. A hum like bees in winter. Sarah stepped into the cold and immediately saw what wasn't there. The lock cover that should have been, the tiny screw that shouldn't be on the floor, the panel that had been reseated so carefully it was almost arrogant. She went to her knees, peered into the gap, and saw the problem with the clarity of someone who had been poor long enough to recognize the shape of clever theft. A palm-sized device, taped inside the wall, wired to sip data like a thief sips air under a door. Not a ghost. A mouth. "Don't touch it," she said. She didn't trust her own breath. Control's voice came quick. "Copy. IT en route." She stood and turned and saw the shadow move. Not a ghost. A man. He'd been behind the next rack, waiting for the room to empty again. Counting on the way machines made people forget to look up, he moved like someone who hadn't eaten breakfast but had run from a cop before. Sarah didn't think. She dropped her shoulder like she'd once seen a waitress do in a bar fight and caught him at the hips. They both hit the concrete hard enough to knock the breath out of them. The guard lunged. The man twisted like a fish on a line. For a second, Sarah had his sleeve, and then she had nothing but fabric and a smell she would remember later. Cheap cologne over fear. He tore free and sprinted. Security pounded after him, cussing into radios that sparked every stairwell. Sarah stood, heart jamming her ribs, and tasted metal. On the floor where the man had been, something dark gleamed, a phone, dropped or thrown. She stepped on it before anyone else could. She didn't know why. Instinct, maybe, or a woman's understanding that the first thing a man like that will do is reach for the proof that might hang him. "IT, she said, voice steady now. "Server room SB, 2. You got a parasite in my wall." Upstairs, alarms of a different kind began to wail. The quiet ones, the ones that pinged in emails and legal pads in a detective's gut. It took 3 hours to thread the story together well enough to hold. Someone had piggybacked an old credential onto a live system and written it through the company's bloodstream like a virus that knew its host. The device in the wall had kissed the network in a way that left almost no lipstick. The freight elevator had been the decoy, the movement that made eyes look left while hands worked right. And someone had known just enough about how Sarah ran a floor to frame it as an inside job. David stood with his palms braced on the back of a chair as IT walked him through the packets they'd captured. He watched numbers move like a current just out of reach. He saw his own name in a header and felt a flash of irrational shame. Old passwords. Old ghosts. James managed the room with conductor's touch. Calm a tenor here. Raise a brass there. Dampen the drums where panic wanted to play. He was in his element. It looked good on him, if you didn't know what to listen for. When the police arrived with questions, David did not ask them to wait. He did not throw weight. He sat in a conference room with a detective who didn't bother to hide the fact that he'd known David since they were 12 and asked him to start at the beginning again. "Robert," David said when the door closed, relief and dread wrestling for space. "You look like you slept." Detective Robert Nash snorted. "I sleep between your emergencies." He put a folder on the table. "Tell me why my morning coffee is in your building." David did. He told the truth in the right order. He didn't mention the part where his hands had itched to write a check in the alley during the fire alarm. When he finished, Robert sat back, eyes narrowed in the way of men who have had to train their faces not to show every thought they think. "Your assistant called me at dawn," Robert said. He wanted to make sure the right story got to the right ears. "I don't like it when people do my job for me." James poked his head in, wearing concern like a tie. "Detective," he said smoothly, "if I can be of any—" "You can sit," Robert said without looking at him. "Or you can leave. Those are your options." James sat. He arranged his face into something between helpful and injured. 2 floors down. Sarah gave her statement to a younger detective with an expression as sharp as polished glass. Sarah told the truth in the way of women, who have had to make people believe them without proof. When the detective asked if she had enemies in the building, Sarah said, "Not yet." The detective smiled despite herself. By late afternoon, the building had a pulse again, but it had developed a cough. Emma, exiled to the library with a stern volunteer and a bribery level of hot chocolate, read Charlotte's Web aloud to a toddler whose parents had introduced themselves as on 15, with a dog who wears sweaters. Every time the door opened, Emma's head snapped up and then relaxed again when it was not the man with the wrong smile. Just before 6, the freight elevator on the service level dinged. James stepped out and found himself face to face with Sarah. "You ran toward the server room," he said, admiration curving his voice where accusation had been earlier. "Not many would." "I ran toward smoke," she said. "It's my job." He let his gaze drift, making it look like a compliment. "It's good that David found someone like you." "David didn't find me," Sarah said. "He found my daughter. I came along for the rent." James's smile thinned. "Be careful with how you tell that story," he said softly. "People hear what they want to hear." Sarah stared at him long enough to make him shift his weight. "They do," she agreed, "which is why you're so good at your job." He laughed and backed into the elevator, like a man retreating from a joke he wasn't sure had a punchline. When the doors whispered shut, Sarah exhaled, rolled her shoulders, and went to recheck the lock that should never have been opened. She didn't know code. She did know when a screw didn't match its brothers. She logged the detail with the care of someone building a case in a place where she wasn't sure yet whether she would be allowed to make one. At 9, the building quieted again. Emma fell asleep with her field guide open to a hawk. Sarah locked the door and checked it twice. David sat in his office with the lights off, the city a dark ocean beyond the glass, and called a woman who still sometimes forgot where she put her keys and never forgot who he was. "Hi, Mom," he said. Margaret Mitchell's voice came through wrapped in warmth and something else, mischief, maybe. "David, dear, you sound tired." "Long day. You sound like yourself." He laughed softly. "How would you know?" "Because you came to the phone like it might be an emergency and stayed like it might be a friend," she said. You only do that when you're trying to do the right thing the right way. He put his head back against the chair. I'm trying not to fix things with money. Boring, she said, pleased. Difficult. Good. I'm out of practice. You're not, she said. You're out of excuses. He let silence stretch until it held both of them. Then, do you want to come to dinner this week? There's a girl who knows the names of birds. I think you should hear her say Peregrine. I'd like that, Margaret said. Will her mother be there? Yes. Then I'll get my hair done. After he hung up, David stood and looked at his reflection until it felt like someone he could believe. He put on his coat and went downstairs. On 15, a book lay open on a couch arm. In the margin, a small hand had drawn a falcon with 2 long wings and labeled it Fast. David smiled, set a note on the counter, how to tell a Cooper's hawk from a sharp-shinned, page 42, and turned toward the door. Something white at the threshold caught his eye. An envelope. No postage. His name, written in a precise hand that strove for elegance and landed on careful. He looked up and down the hall. Empty. He broke the seal with his thumb and read, Mr. Mitchell, you don't know me. You will. You have something we want. You think you can build walls. We learn to walk through them. Call the number on the back at 9 a.m. alone. If you don't, we'll take something you can't replace. The back was blank. The threat was not. The door across the hall opened. Sarah, hair in a knot, T-shirt soft with washings, looked at his face and saw the thing he wasn't saying. What? He handed her the paper. She read it. She didn't blench. She didn't dramatize. She moved to the side so she could see down the hall without stepping fully into it. Is Emma safe? She's sleeping. Then we whisper, she said calmly, the way people do when a stray dog shows up on a playground and you don't want to make anyone run. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the hum of the building and understood 2 things at once. The life they were trying to build had been noticed. The people who had noticed weren't the kind who knocked. Sarah folded the note as neatly as if it were a bill she had no money for and slid it into her pocket. Tomorrow, she said, we tell your friend the detective. Tonight, we lock the door. David nodded. He felt the old impulse surge, the urge to fix the world with speed, to slam his accounts into a problem and smother it. He let the feeling crest and go. Tonight, he agreed, we lock the door. They did, and in a server room 2 floors below, a little green light blinked twice and went still, as if a breath had been held and then released. The first 3 days in the Whitmore Tower apartment passed in a blur of warmth and strange new routines. For the first time in years, Sarah didn't wake up shivering under a thin blanket or calculating how many bus transfers she'd need to get to her second job. Emma's cheeks began to lose that gray pallor. The circles under her eyes faded. She'd wander barefoot on the thick carpets, marveling at how her footsteps made no sound. David didn't hover, but he was around. Sometimes in the evenings, after his meetings, he'd stop by with small things, a new book for Emma, a potted plant for the kitchen, pastries from a bakery across the river. He didn't try to insert himself into their lives, but his presence was a quiet reassurance, like the hum of the building's climate control, steady, reliable. By the 4th day, the rhythm felt almost normal. Sarah hated how quickly she'd begun to rely on it. She reminded herself every night not to get comfortable, that this was temporary. Still, she caught herself glancing at the door around the time David usually came by, and Emma had started asking, Is Mr. Whitmore coming tonight? That Thursday evening, a snowstorm rolled over Chicago like a slow, grinding tide. The streets far below were empty by 8 p.m., the only movement the sweep of headlights from the rare taxi. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of Emma's laughter from the living room. David had brought her a puzzle, and she was determined to finish it before bed. Sarah was in the kitchen, rinsing mugs, letting herself relax for once. The first sign that something was wrong was so small she almost missed it, the subtle flicker of the lights. Once, twice. She frowned, drying her hands. This building never lost power. A heartbeat later, her phone buzzed with text from the building security system. Minor network interruption detected. Investigating. She was still reading it when the landline, installed just days ago, rang. Ms. Carter? The voice on the other end was male, professional. This is Control. We detected an anomaly on the East Service entrance. Likely weather-related, but a muffled crash cut through the line from somewhere far below. The voice broke off. Stand by. The call went dead. Sarah set the phone down slowly. She crossed to the living room. Emma! Honey, why don't you? She stopped. The puzzle was half finished on the coffee table. The chair was empty. Emma? Her voice was sharp now. Emma! A faint sound came from the hallway outside, a soft scuff, like a shoe brushing against carpet. Sarah's chest went cold. She snatched her key card from the counter and yanked the door open. At the far end of the corridor, a man in a maintenance jacket was walking quickly toward the service stairwell. In his left hand, barely visible, was Emma's small wrist. Hey! The word ripped from her throat, raw and furious. The man didn't turn. He pushed the stairwell door open. Sarah ran. Her flat slipped on the polished floor, but she didn't care. Emma! She shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. She was halfway there when another door opened. David's. What happened? Someone's got her. David didn't ask for details. He sprinted ahead, the muscles in his back bunching under his shirt. The stairwell door slammed shut ahead of them. They burst through it seconds later, into a rush of cold air from below. Footsteps pounded down the stairs, one set heavy, one light, and quick. David took the steps two at a time. Sarah followed, her breath burning her throat. On the next landing, Emma's voice rang out, high and scared. Mom! The man was 3 flights below now, moving fast. David vaulted the railing, landing hard 2 levels down, cutting the distance in half. The man tried to shove Emma through the door to the loading dock, but David hit him from behind, driving him into the wall. Emma fell to her knees, coughing. Sarah was there in seconds, hauling her up, clutching her close. The man struggled, snarling, but David slammed him against the concrete hard enough to rattle the door. His jacket tore open, revealing a harness under his shirt. Small black devices strapped inside, wires looping like veins. Security. David barked into his comm, Doc's stairwell, now. 2 guards arrived within moments, guns drawn but steady. They wrenched the man's arm behind him, snapping cuffs around his wrists. Sarah pulled back enough to look at Emma. Did he hurt you? Emma shook her head, eyes wide. He said he was taking me somewhere safe. I didn't believe him. David's jaw tightened. Good girl. One of the guards patted down the suspect, producing a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He handed it to David. The handwriting was the same as the note from before. You can't protect her forever. In the control room, the air smelled faintly of burnt electronics. The suspect sat in a chair, silent, his gaze fixed on a point just above the monitors. Detective Robert Nash stood beside him, flipping through a small evidence bag containing the harness. Signal jammers, Nash said grimly. Knocked out your cameras on the east side for 3 minutes. Long enough to get in. Sarah crossed her arms tightly. So this wasn't random. Not even close. Nash slid the bag into his coat pocket. They knew your daughter's name. They knew your schedule. This guy didn't come alone. He's the unlucky one who got caught. David stood with his hands on the back of a chair, leaning forward. So we have to assume they'll try again. Nash nodded. The question is, why her? And why now? The suspect finally spoke, his voice low and almost conversational. You think you built a fortress here, but every fortress has a door. We've already walked through it once. Sarah's skin prickled. Who sent you? The man smiled faintly. You'll find out. Soon. Nash stepped between them. Get him out of here. 2 officers led the man away. Sarah let out a breath. She didn't realize she'd been holding. David turned to her. We're locking this building down. No one in or out without my clearance. And we're moving you and Emma to a higher floor tonight. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. But that's not enough. David frowned. What do you mean? They already got inside once. We need to make them come back. On our terms. If they think they can get at Emma, they'll try again. Next time we'll be ready. For a moment. David just looked at her, and in that moment she didn't look like someone he was helping. She looked like someone standing shoulder to shoulder with him in a fight. "All right," he said finally. "Let's set the trap." The conference room on the 42nd floor had a view that could make anyone feel untouchable. Tonight, it felt like the opposite. Too much glass, too much dark sky pressing against it. Detective Nash stood at the head of the table, his jacket draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up. David leaned on the edge of the table, jaw tight, while Sarah sat beside Emma, her hand resting protectively over her daughter's. "We can't keep playing defense," David said. "They'll just keep trying until they succeed." Nash crossed his arms. "And your idea of playing offense is what? Dangling an 8-year-old as bait?" Sarah's head snapped up. "Absolutely not." David's gaze didn't waver. "That's not what I'm suggesting. Emma never leaves the safe perimeter. She's under constant watch. But we make it look like she's vulnerable." Nash gave a humorless laugh. "You want to stage a fake opportunity? That's dangerous even for trained operatives. And she's a kid." "I know exactly how dangerous it is," David said, voice low but steady, "which is why we control every inch of the environment." He pointed to the blueprint on the table, a floor plan of the 40th floor. 2 access points, 1 choke point, cameras in every blind spot they used last time. We put them in a place they think they can win, then close the door. Sarah studied the plan. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't interrupt. She could see the logic and the risk. "And if they don't take the bait?" Nash asked. "Then we keep hunting. But at least we're not waiting for the next knock on the door." Sarah finally spoke. "If we do this, Emma is never out of my sight. Not for a second." David met her eyes. "Agreed." The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Security teams moved quietly through the building, installing new sensors behind ventilation grates, hiding microcameras in recessed lighting. Nash brought in 2 plainclothes officers, posing as maintenance staff. Emma watched it all with wide eyes, sensing the tension but not fully understanding the stakes. Sarah explained only as much as she needed to. "We're just making sure no one can scare you again," she told her, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. On the 3rd night, the trap was set. The 40th floor was staged to look lived in, lights on, a TV murmuring softly, a mug of cocoa half finished on the coffee table. Through a narrow gap in the curtains, you could see the glow of the city. In reality, Emma sat with Sarah in a reinforced safe room 2 doors down, the walls lined with monitors showing every angle of the setup apartment. David was in the adjacent control hub, wearing an earpiece linked to every guard on the floor. Nash paced behind him, chewing on an unlit cigar. Movement on camera 6. A voice said over comms. David leaned forward. The feed showed a shadow moving against the service corridor wall, just outside the trap apartment. The figure paused at the door, then bent over the lock. 30 seconds later, the door eased open. The intruder slipped inside, black clothing, gloves, a cap pulled low. He moved with precision, scanning the corners, checking the bathroom, glancing toward the TV as if making sure the sound covered his steps. David's hand hovered over the signal to close in. Not yet. They needed him inside, confident. The man moved toward the coffee table. His gloved hand reached for the mug. That's when David saw it. A faint glint on the man's wrist. A watch. Not just any watch. David knew that watch. "Hold," David said sharply. "What?" Nash's voice was a growl. "Hold position." "I know him." The intruder turned toward the window, just enough of the camera to catch his profile. David felt the air leave his lungs. It was Mark Vance, former head of security for Whitmore Industries, a man David had once trusted with his life. Before David could process the betrayal, the man spoke directly toward one of the cameras, as if he knew exactly where it was. "David," he said, voice calm, almost conversational. "We need to talk." Every guard froze. Nash's eyes narrowed. "He's baiting you." David didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the screen. "Lock down the floor," he ordered. Doors slammed shut throughout the 40th. Alarms muted to a low, steady pulse. Vance didn't flinch. "You built yourself a cage, David," he said. stepping closer to the camera. And you dragged him into it. Sarah's voice came over the comm, tight with fury. Who is he? David's mouth was dry. Someone who used to work for me. Someone who knows every weakness this building has. Vance smiled faintly. We're not done here. You'll hear from us soon. Before the guards could reach him, he tossed something toward the coffee table, a small black device, and bolted for the window. It wasn't glass shattering that followed. It was smoke, dense, choking, blinding. By the time they cleared it, Vance was gone. The device lay on the table, blinking red. Nash knelt over it. It's a transmitter. He just told someone exactly how to find you. David's hands curled into fists. Then we find him first. That night, after Emma was asleep in the safe room, Sarah found David alone in the control hub, staring at the frozen image of Vance on the monitor. You knew him, she said. Yes. And you trusted him. David's jaw tightened. I thought I did. Sarah stepped closer. Then tell me why a man you trusted is after my daughter. David turned to face her. His eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. Because I walked away from something years ago, and now it's walking back toward me. The night after the intrusion, Whitmore Tower no longer felt like a fortress of glass. It felt like a massive fishbowl. Anyone inside could be watched, exposed, vulnerable. Technicians moved to the halls, replacing sensors. Security patrols doubled, and yet the silence felt heavier than the sound of an elevator's hum. Nash walked into the temporary command room on the 40th floor with 2 steaming cups of black coffee. On the wall, a blown-up still from the security feed filled the screen, pixelated to the point the man's face seemed carved in stone. Mark Vance, former head of security for Whitmore Industries. David stood rigid in front of it, jaw locked tight. You're going to have to tell me everything, Nash said flatly, not as an accusation, but as a requirement. David's Adam's apple bob once. Vance was the man I trusted most. 3 years ago, when the company partnered with a private security contractor called Greyrook, he was the one who made the introductions. Officially, the contract was to implement a building management system. Unofficially, it was for something else. Sarah, standing with arms crossed, cut in, her voice sharp. Something else meaning what exactly? David turned his head toward her. A pilot program called Glassline. It used Wi-Fi and Bluetooth sniffers to map movement in and around the building, prevent threats before they happened. That was the pitch. But later, they suggested expanding to community hotspots, even women's shelters and homeless shelters. They claimed it was to protect kids. The moment I saw the client list, I shut it down. The buyers weren't just law enforcement. Nash tilted his head. You keep proof. I extracted part of the payment ledger, the client list, and hid it offline in a place no one would think to look. Sarah's brow furrowed. Where? David drew a slow breath. In a children's reading app. A charity app one sponsored that year called Fireflies. The data was hidden using steganography in the illustrations for the storybook The Fireflies Lantern. Only devices donated to certain shelters could decrypt it. Nash froze. So, you're telling me the key to that data is in tablets given to shelters? Places like St. Bridget? Emma, sitting quietly with a book in her lap, looked up, her eyes wide. I used one of those pink tablets at St. Bridget. It had the Fireflies app. I read the Fireflies story a lot, and I logged in with the name Sunflower like the volunteer told me. The air in the room tightened. David's voice was low. Sunflower _22, that was Alice's old handle. His gaze shifted to Nash. When someone accesses that key, the old system pings. Vance saw it. He followed the trail straight to Emma. Sarah felt her stomach drop out. So she's a target not just because she's leverage against you, but because she unlocked something you left behind? Emma shrank closer to her mother. I didn't know. I just wanted to read. David crouched in front of her. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault. The next afternoon, Nash and a female detective went to St. Bridget's shelter. The air was a mix of bleach and hot cocoa. Children's laughter echoing down the hall. Eileen, the shelter's manager, led them into a storage room stacked with tangled charging cables and cracked devices patched with tape. Emma Carter? Eileen nodded. Sweet kid. Last time she was here, she borrowed a pink tablet. Returned it last week. She rummaged through a bin labeled lost and found and set a faded pink tablet case on the table, its butterfly stickers peeling. Nash powered it on. The screen glowed a faint blue. The Firefly's icon pulsed yellow, and beneath it a logged-in account. Sunflower. We'll need to hold on to this, Nash said. Eileen pressed her lips together, then nodded. On the drive back, the detective ran a quick scan with a signal analyzer. There's a sleeping beacon here. Pings once every 36 hours to a dead endpoint. She glanced up. Someone set up a proxy to intercept those orphan pings. Vance, Nash muttered, or whoever he's working for. The tablet was brought into the 40th floor's command center, where a temporary forensics lab had been set up. David, lead engineer Anya, and a CPD digital crimes expert worked like surgeons over a fragile pink device. The code is embedded in the storybook illustrations, Anya said, eyes fixed on lines of hex. LSB steganography spread across the pixels, with an XOR layer key to the device ID and the shelter's beacon ID. Can you decrypt it? Sarah asked, her voice tight, if we can reconstruct the original salt. Anya turned to Emma. Do you remember where in St. Bridget you used this tablet? Emma shut her eyes, searching her memory. In the reading corner, near the window, next to Miss Eileen's cactus. Anya smiled gently. That's perfect. The beacon ID from that spot will give us the salt. She typed rapidly, commands streaming across the monitor. A compressed file began to emerge. The forensics expert leaned forward. Don't open it fully yet. Whoever embedded this knew their craft. There might be a kill switch. David looked to Nash. We need a live extract before someone wipes it remotely. Pull the first 10 pages. Nash ordered, then we'll go deeper. The mobile printer hummed, spitting out the first sheet. Greyrook Ledger /Glass on UX/FY3. Below it, columns of payments, wallet IDs, timestamps. The second page listed clients. Company names redacted, but contact aliases visible. Gideon REGR. Northbridge Hollow Sparrow. On the third page, Sarah's eyes caught on a small, seemingly ordinary payment. Vendor, Morrison's Diner. Purpose, facility janitorial access. Amount, $3,000. Date, 2 weeks before closure. Color drained from her face. That's my old job. They paid to plant something there. Nash underlined it with his pen. They were close to you long before you knew. On the fourth page, Anya suddenly cursed. Stop. We've got unusual traffic. Someone's trying to push a wipe command to the app. The Firefly's icon on the tablet flickered erratically before going white. Emma gasped. Kill the network. Anya yanked the Wi-Fi cable free. We've still got the extracted portion. David turned to Nash. Is it enough for a warrant? Enough to get a search order for Northbridge and Greyrook offices, Nash said grimly. But the man behind it, Gideon Rowe, he's been a ghost for years. Vance works for him, David said. And he wants what I have. Not for money. For silence. That night, Emma slept curled in the safe room, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Sarah sat on the balcony, watching rain needle down the city's glass. David brought her a mug of steaming tea. What aren't you telling me? She asked plainly. David leaned against the frame, the rain ticking like a metronome on the glass. The day Alice died, I swore I built something no one could breach. I trusted systems and algorithms more than people. Glassline started as that promise. It was good in theory. It rotted in practice. I pulled out, but not before leaving footprints. Emma stepped on one. Sarah studied his reflection in the window. 2 adults carved hollow by secrets. Do you know the cruelest part? The first to pay the price is always a child. I know, David said quietly, which is why I'm ending this. Not alone. He met her eyes, then nodded. Before dawn, Nash's team raided a rented office labeled Northbridge Protective. It was stripped bare, swivel chairs, cut Ethernet cables, the ozone tang of electronics. In a corner, a small router light still blinked faintly. Don't touch it, Nash ordered. A tech handed him an anti-static bag. from a slot in the router. They pulled a micro SD card wrapped in cloth tape. In pencil, it read, H. Sparrow. Empty Sparrow, Nash muttered. Looks like this bird left a feather. At the lab, the card yielded keylogs from a remote terminal. Chat threads between MV and GR. MV, target pinged. Sunflower key awake. JAR, confirmed. Apply pressure on mother channel. MV, diner route compromised. Switching to shelter route. JAR, proceed. Avoid law. Nash scribbled. MV equals Mark Vance. GR equals Gideon Rowe. At that moment, David's phone vibrated. An unlisted number. He answered. I'm listening, he said. A low, smooth male voice came through, the kind that felt like velvet pulled against a grain. Hello, David. It's been a long time. Gideon. Sarah's head snapped toward him. David put on speaker. You picked the wrong target, David said coldly. Leave the Carters alone. On the contrary, Gideon Rowe chuckled softly. The girl, unlock your vault. You hit it better than I thought, but not well enough. I don't want the money. I want the list, and your promise that you'll vanish from my path. Not going to happen. Then negotiate with time. A pause. Tomorrow, 11 p.m. parking level B. You, the pink tablet. If I smell law enforcement, my men won't miss like Mark did. The line went dead. The room was silent except for rain. Nash shook his head. He's trying to draw you into the open. Then we'll make sure it's our ground, David said. Sarah gripped his hand hard. This ends here. From the safe room, Emma's voice called sleepily. Mom? Mr. David? Sarah smiled faintly. It's okay, sweetheart. Just the rain. Emma glanced toward the window. The city a blur of wet lights. Will the fireflies come back? David knelt beside her bed, his voice warm. They will. But this time, the fireflies will light our way. She nodded and drifted back to sleep, clutching her rabbit. On the control table, the pink tablet, disconnected from any network, suddenly vibrated. The screen lit up, black background, white text appearing as if handwritten. Hi, Firefly. The adult stared. Another line appeared, slow as a heartbeat. Tomorrow, 11 p.m. Don't be late. The screen went dark. In the reflection on the glass, 3 faces remained, exhausted, furious, determined. Nash slipped the micro SD into an evidence pouch. Fine, we'll give him the meeting he wants, but on our terms. David's gaze met Sarah's. No apologies, no regrets, just the shape of a plan. A cold parking deck, a pink device, and a trap made of steel. Outside, the rain washed the glass clean. But the cracks, those only showed when lightning struck. And next time it did, the shadow in the dark would have nowhere left to hide. The man's footsteps were deliberate, the sound of leather soles clicking against the damp concrete. He moved like he owned the space, even though he was stepping into the middle of someone else's trap. David didn't move from under the halo light. His grip on the tablet was loose, casual, but his gaze was locked on Gideon Rowe. The hooded man shifted his weight, clearly caught off guard. Sir, quiet, Gideon said without looking at him. His voice carried easily across the empty parking level, smooth and unhurried, but with gravity that made even armed men obey. When he reached the edge of the light, Gideon stopped. The brightness carved his face into sharp lines, dark eyes that missed nothing, a faint scar tracing from his temple down to the corner of his jaw. It's been a while, David, he said. Not long enough, David replied. You've kept something that doesn't belong to you. Gideon's gaze flicked briefly to the pink tablet. I'm here to correct that. David tilted his head. You sent Vance. You sent these 3. You didn't need to come yourself. So why are you here? Because, Gideon said, stepping just a fraction into the halo light, I know you, and I know you're too stubborn to hand it over unless you believe the alternative is worse. Sarah's voice whispered in David's ear from her hidden position. He's trying to control the rhythm. Don't let him. David ignored the calm, and what's the alternative? Gideon's expression didn't change, but his voice cooled. The child. The words hit the space like a blade. Sarah's nails dug into her transmitter, every muscle screaming to move. Nash's voice came hard over channel. Hold. Hold. David didn't blink. You touch her, and there's no hole deep enough for you to hide in. Gideon almost smiled. You think this is about threats? No, David. It's about inevitability. That tablet holds names, people who've paid for silence, for vanishing acts. You have no right to it. It also holds proof, David countered. Enough to burn you and everyone on that list. Gideon took one more step forward. Then maybe we negotiate. That's not happening. The hooded man moved suddenly, stepping into the light, hand reaching for the tablet. In the same second, the halo light snapped off, Nash's signal. Darkness swallowed the space. Then, the roar of boots on concrete. Flashlights cut jagged arcs through the dark. Muffled shouts. The sharp crack of a stun baton connecting. Sarah ducked low, moving along the shadow of the pillar toward David. One of Gideon's armed men raised his weapon toward the movement, only to be dropped by a taser dart from Nash's position. The man convulsed and went down hard. The hooded man lunged again. David pivoted, slamming the tablet edge first into the man's wrist. The hooded man yelped, gun clattering to the floor. David followed with a knee to the ribs, sending him sprawling. In the chaos, Gideon didn't move like a man surprised. He moved like a man tracking the exits. David saw it too late. Gideon slipped sideways into the darkness, vanishing toward the freight lift. Nash! David barked into the comm lift shaft. I've got him! Nash's voice cut, replaced by static. Sarah reached David's side. Where's Emma? She's safe, David said, scanning the shadows. We need to end this, now. By the time they reached the freight lift, the doors were open, but the car was still there. Gideon was gone. A faint noise drew David's attention, an access hatch in the lift roof swinging shut. He looked at Sarah. Stairwell to level C. Now! They took the stairs two at a time. On level C, the heavy door to the service tunnel was ajar. Cold air rolled out, carrying the scent of oil and dust. They moved inside, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the narrow walls. Then voices ahead. He'll follow. Gideon's voice said, calm and certain. Sir, we should... No, let him come. He needs to see what's at stake. David stepped forward, but Sarah's hand caught his sleeve. It's a trap. I know, David said, and kept moving. When they emerged into the wider chamber, Gideon stood alone. No armed man, no hooded lieutenant. Just him, under a single hanging bulb. He looked at David, then at Sarah. I see you brought her. Good. David's eyes narrowed. You said this was about the list. It is, Gideon said, but you still don't understand why the girl matters. She's not just a key. She's proof. Proof that your glass-line program worked exactly as designed. That you can track anyone, anywhere if you know how to look. That program was shut down. Gideon's smile was faint. You can't shut down knowledge, David. You can only choose who gets to use it. David took a step closer. Then here's my choice. A sudden clang reverberated through the space. The bulb above flickered, and from the tunnel behind them, the sound of boots, more than one pair, rushed closer. Sarah's voice was barely audible. We're surrounded. Gideon didn't move, and now you see why I came in person. You needed to believe you had the upper hand. He glanced toward the shadows. Bring them. Two figures appeared, dragging someone between them. David's breath caught. It was Nash, hands bound, blood on his temple. Your move, Whitmore, Gideon said. Nash stumbled as the two men shoved him forward. His hands were bound with a thick plastic zip tie, a thin trickle of blood running from his temple to his jaw. His eyes, though, were sharp and burning, fixed on David. Don't, Nash said through gritted teeth. Whatever he's asking, don't you give it. Gideon Rose gazed and leave David as he moved around Nash, almost like a wolf circling prey. Your man is loyal. I respect that. His tone was calm, conversational, but the echo in the concrete chamber made every word sound like it belonged in a verdict. David's jaw tightened. You lay another hand on him. Gideon raised an open palm. Please. Violence is the language of amateurs. I prefer leverage. From behind him, one of his men produced a phone and set it on the metal crate between them. The screen lit up, showing a live feed. Emma, in the safe room, asleep with her stuffed rabbit. Sarah's breath caught. How? Gideon's voice cut across hers. Wireless is a wonderful thing. Your security cameras? Not as closed-loop as you think. David's pulse roared in his ears. If you touch her... I won't, Gideon said, almost gently. Unless you force my hand. The tablet, David. Put on the crate, and you all walk out. No heroics, no blood. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling but defiant. You're terrified of what's on that list. Otherwise, you have killed us already. Gideon looked at her for the first time, really looked, and there was a flicker, interest, perhaps even admiration. Smart. But fear isn't my motivation. Control is. That list keeps chaos out of the system. Remove it, and the whole board burns. Nash barked a humorless laugh. Translation, it keeps him in power. The chamber was silent, except for the faint drip of water in the distance. David's mind worked like a machine under strain. He could feel the weight of Sarah's eyes on him, the silent plea in them. Don't give him Emma. Don't give him the tablet. But there was Nash, bleeding and bound, and the feet of Emma, asleep and vulnerable. David spoke slowly. You think the tablet is the only copy? A flicker across Gideon's face. Quick. But I think you're bluffing. Then call it, David said, from the corner. Sarah caught on instantly. You really believe he'd carry the only copy of something this important into a meeting with you? One of Gideon's men shifted, uneasy. Gideon's eyes narrowed. Where is it? David didn't answer. Instead, he lifted the tablet and held it in one hand, the other slowly reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a small black device, no bigger than a car key fob. That, David said, is a dead man switch. I press it and the list goes public. Every name, every transaction, no redactions. The reaction was instant. Two of Gideon's men stepped forward, rifles coming up. Easy, Gideon said, holding out a hand. His tone stayed smooth, but his eyes had gone cold. That would be unfortunate for everyone. David took a step closer to the crate. Then let's make this simple. You release Nash. You cut the feed to Emma. You walk out of here, and I give you the tablet in 30 days, after I know she's safe. Gideon studied him for a long moment. The faint scar on his face caught the light as he tilted his head. You're not in a position to negotiate. Neither are you, David said, because you're not the only one with leverage tonight. From the far end of the tunnel, there was a sharp crack. Not gunfire, but the sound of a metal latch giving way. Floodlights snapped on, blinding in the confined space. Voices shouted, Chicago PD, hands where I can see them. As Nash's backup team poured in from two entrances at once, weapons drawn, the room erupted in chaos. Gideon's men hesitated, caught between raising their rifles and dropping them. Nash drove his shoulder into the guard, holding him, snapping the zip tie against the edge of the crate. David lunged forward, shoving the tablet into Sarah's hands. Go! But Gideon was already moving, not toward David, not toward Sarah, but toward the service tunnel exit. In the swirl of bodies and shouting, he slipped away again, a shadow in the floodlight glare. Minutes later, the chamber was secure. Two of Gideon's men were in cuffs, the others unconscious or restrained. Nash sat on a crate, a medic checking the gash on his head. Sarah clutched the tablet, like it was Emma herself. He's not going to stop, is he? She asked. David shook his head. No, but neither am I. Nash looked up. We heard him tonight. Not enough to take him off the board, but enough to make him change his game. Sarah's voice was quiet. And when he changes it? David's eyes were on the tunnel where Gideon had vanished. Then we change faster. Above them, somewhere beyond the concrete and steel, Emma was still sleeping, unaware that her name was now written in a book Gideon wrote with killed clothes. The air in the underground chamber still smelled of ozone from the floodlights and burnt insulation. Gideon Rowe was gone, his men in custody, but the victory felt hollow. David knew better than to mistake survival for safety. By the time they made it back to Whitmore Tower, it was nearly dawn. The skyline outside the glass walls glowed faintly pink, a color too gentle for the mood inside. Sarah stayed with Emma in the safe room, both of them curled on the couch. Emma's small hand rested on the folded drawing of the Firefly lantern. Nash stood at the kitchen counter, nursing a cup of coffee like it was the only thing holding him upright. "You realize," he said without looking up, "he's going to hit back, and it's not going to be with a gun." David poured himself a cup. "He'll try to make me the threat instead of him." "Exactly," Nash said. "Flip the narrative. Paint you as the dangerous one holding stolen data. He's done it before. He's had judges in his pocket, corporate friends in every boardroom." David's phone buzzed. An encrypted alert from his corporate security division. He opened it and swore under his breath. "What is it?" Nash asked. David handed him the phone. On the screen was a headline from a major news site. "Billionaire CEO David Whitmore under federal investigation for data breach and extortion." Sarah appeared in the doorway, her voice sharp. "What?" David turned the screen toward her. "Gideon's moving fast." Nash scanned the article. "Anonymous sources claim Whitmore Industries is in possession of classified government contractor data, including identities of covert operatives. They're saying you're holding it to influence policy decisions." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "He's framing you for the thing he's been doing." Classic misdirection. Nash said, "But it'll stick unless we get ahead of it." They didn't have long to wait for the next strike. By midday, 3 unmarked SUVs rolled up outside Whitmore Tower. Men in dark windbreakers fanned out in the lobby. "FBI," the lead agent announced. "We have a warrant to search the premises." David met them in the lobby, calm but cold. "You'll find nothing illegal here." "That's not for you to decide," the agent replied, handing him the warrant. As agents moved through the building, Sarah stayed close to Emma, her stomach tight. "They're tearing through your offices," she said later when David returned. "They won't find a tablet," David assured her. "It's not here, and they won't find the real backups either." Sarah frowned. "Where are they?" David hesitated. "Somewhere Gideon can't reach without risking too much." She didn't press, but the answer unsettled her. That night, Gideon made his second move. It came in the form of a video, slick, professionally edited, distributed to media and social networks. David sat in the dim glow of his office, watching it with Sarah and Nash. Gideon's voice narrated over images of children in shelters, blurred faces, and security footage of David from years ago. "He told you he cared about the vulnerable. But what if I told you David Whitmore built a system to track them? What if I told you he's still using it, not to protect, but to control? Ask him about Glassline. Ask him about Fireflies." Sarah's hand gripped the arm of the chair. "He's turning it into a conspiracy theory." Nash shook his head. "No, he's turning it into a story people want to believe. The rich billionaire spying on kids. It'll stick." The video ended with a still image. David stepping out of the car, head down, cropped to look furtive. Across it, in bold white letters, "Was he hiding?" The next morning, protesters gathered outside Whitmore Tower. Most were holding signs. Some shouted into megaphones. Sarah stood at the window, watching the crowd. "He's isolating you." "Not me," David said quietly. "Us." Emma padded into the room, rubbing her eyes. "Why are there people yelling outside?" Sarah knelt beside her. "They don't understand what's really happening." Emma looked at David. "Can't you just tell them?" David's lips pressed into a thin line. "Not yet." By late afternoon, the situation escalated again. One of Nash's trusted contacts sent an urgent message. Gideon was pushing for an emergency court order to seize all of David's assets on the grounds of preventing further harm. "That would cripple us," Nash said. "We'd lose the ability to fund security, move resources." "That's the point," David said. Sarah looked between them. "So what do we do?" David leaned forward, eyes hard. "We hit back, but not just with defense. We go after his foundations, money, influence, reputation. Nash raised a brow. That means going public with at least part of the list. Not the whole thing, David said. Just enough to burn his allies and make them distance themselves from him. Once he's alone, we move. Sarah's voice was low but certain. And until then, David's gaze moved to Emma. Until then, we make sure she's untouchable. That night, David activated a contingency he'd buried years earlier, a secure facility outside the city, built like a luxury home on the surface but with reinforced concrete beneath. Sarah and Emma were escorted there under heavy security. As the convoy pulled away, Sarah caught David's hand through the open car window. Don't let him turn you into what he's saying you are. David's reply was quiet. I won't, but I will end him. The cars rolled into the dark. David stood alone on the curb, the hum of the city around him. Somewhere out there, Gideon Rowe was already planning his next move. And this time, David would be ready to take the fight to him. The safe house was quiet. Too quiet for David's liking. Out in the countryside, the air smelled of pine and damp soil, far from the city's constant hum. It was the kind of silence most people found peaceful. David found it dangerous. Silence meant you couldn't hear what was moving against you. Inside the reinforced basement, Sarah tucked Emma into bed. The little girl clutched her stuffed rabbit, already drifting off. Sarah kissed her forehead, but her mind wasn't on bedtime stories. It was on David, back in the city, walking straight into Gideon's shadow war. David's war room wasn't a room at all. It was a repurposed data center, cold enough to see his breath, every wall covered in live feeds and scrolling code. Nash leaned against a rack of servers, reading a file that looked decades old. You kept this buried a long time, Nash said, flipping to the brittle pages. It was meant to stay buried. David replied without looking up from his laptop. Glassline was supposed to be shut down. But Gideon didn't just keep it, he weaponized it. Nash nodded slowly. So we weaponized the truth. David's hands moved across the keyboard. I've isolated a subset of the list, names of corporate donors who funnel money through Gideon's foundations. We leak these first. It'll make them scramble to protect themselves, and they'll cut him loose before they burn with him. You leak them, you light a match in a room full of gas, Nash warned. David finally looked up. Exactly. The first strike landed at 8:17 a.m. the next morning. An anonymous data drop appeared on a whistleblower site, complete with documents, bank records, and internal memos linking 3 Fortune 500 CEOs to illegal lobbying efforts through Gideon's network. By 9 a.m., the stock prices of all 3 companies were in freefall. News anchors speculated in urgent tones. Gideon's allies made public statements condemning corruption, careful not to say his name. Sarah saw the headlines on a secure tablet at the safe house. She recognized David's fingerprints all over the move. Precise, devastating, and public enough to shift the conversation. Emma peeked over her shoulder. Is that Daddy David's work? Sarah smiled faintly. Something like that. Gideon didn't stay silent. By midday, a counter leak hit the same whistleblower platform. Only this time it was personal. Photos of David at high-profile events, cropped and captioned to imply shady dealings. A heavily edited audio clip that made it sound like David was admitting to spying on select targets. Nash listened to the audio twice, then shook his head. It's spliced together. Half those words aren't yours. But to the public, it's poison. David leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. Then we don't argue with it. We make it irrelevant. That afternoon, David arranged a closed-door meeting with 2 investigative journalists who'd spent years chasing Gideon's network. He gave them enough verified documents to keep them busy for weeks, but withheld the most explosive details. You'll get the rest when I know my people are safe, he told them. One of the reporters, a sharp-eyed woman named Keller, studied him. You're making enemies that don't forgive. David's voice was quiet. They started this. By nightfall, the tide was shifting. Social media was split, half calling David a hero, half branded him the villain Gideon wanted. But in the boardrooms and back channels where real power moved, Gideon was bleeding support. In his office, somewhere across the city, Gideon stood by the window, watching the lights flicker on in the skyline. One of his lieutenants entered, pale-faced. "We've lost 3 donors in 6 hours," the man said. "Another is reconsidering." Gideon's jaw worked. "Whitmore thinks he can play my game. What do you want us to do?" Gideon turned from the window. "Change the board." 2 days later, Nash intercepted chatter that made his stomach drop. Gideon had shifted focus away from David directly. He was going after Sarah. David read the decrypted message twice. He's framing her as a leak. That pulls her into the investigation, Nash said grimly. Once she's in the system, she's exposed. No safe house will hide her from that. David closed his laptop. Then we bring her back. Close. Nash frowned. That's exactly what he wants, to draw you in. David met his eyes. Then let's give him what he wants. But on our terms. That night, under the cover of the supply convoy, David arrived at the safe house. Emma ran to him, arms out, and he scooped her up, holding her tighter than he meant to. Sarah stood back, watching him with an expression that was equal parts relief and wariness. "What's happened?" she asked. "He's coming for you," David said. "Not physically, not yet. But if we don't get ahead of it, he'll destroy you on paper first." Sarah crossed her arms. "Then we stop him on paper." David's mouth quirked in a faint smile. "That's the plan." As the wind whispered through the pines outside, Sarah had the sudden, unshakable feeling that the next move in this game would decide everything. Not just for David, but for all of them. The safe house lights flickered twice just after midnight. It was subtle, just enough to make Sarah glance up from the kitchen table, where she was sorting through the legal files David had brought. David noticed it too. "That's not a power surge," he said, already moving toward the control panel. Nash's voice crackled over the comms a second later. "Perimeter cameras just went black. All at once. That's not possible without a hard kill." Sarah's stomach dropped. "You mean—" "They're here," David said. The protocol was simple. Sarah and Emma go to the reinforced lower room. Nash takes a perimeter. David holds the main entry. But simple plans never survive the first hit. Nash's voice in the earpiece was low and fast. "We've got 3? No. For heat signatures, West Treeline. Moving in formation." David chambered a round in his pistol. "Weapons? Too far to see. But they're not walking like hikers." Sarah crouched in front of Emma. "Sweetheart, you're going to go downstairs and wait with me, okay?" Emma's eyes were wide. "Is it the bad man?" Sarah swallowed hard. "Just stay close to me." The first shot came not at the door, but at the transformer behind the house. The entire building plunged into darkness. Emergency lights kicked in red and dim. David took position by the front windows. Through the infrared scope, he caught a flicker of movement. One of the intruders, dressed in matte black, moving low. 2 minutes, Nash's voice warned. David's mind was already moving. Gideon wouldn't send a kill team this soon unless something had shifted, unless he needed David's silence now. That meant the list was closer to going public than Gideon could tolerate. The first man breached the side door with a silent pry bar, slipping inside like a shadow. David waited until he crossed the beam of the emergency light, then stepped out. The fight was fast. 2 shots center mass, the intruder dropping without a sound. From upstairs, the faint sound of Emma's frightened voice carried down the hall. David's pulse spiked. "Nash, north side." "I'm there." Nash's voice came, followed by the thud of a body hitting the floor. Sarah kept Emma behind her as she moved toward the safe room. But when she reached the reinforced door, the keypad was dark. The power cut had killed the electronic lock. She turned, heart pounding. The hallway behind her was empty, too empty. Then a voice came from the shadows. "Mrs. Hale." Sarah froze. A man stepped into the faint red light, face obscured by a mask, a suppressed pistol in his hand. "Come with me," he said. David heard the muffled shout through the comms, Sarah's voice, sharp with fear. He was already moving before Nash called it. "West corridor. They've got her." David rounded the corner, just in time to see the masked man drag Sarah backward toward the service exit. Emma was nowhere in sight. Sarah had pushed her into the storage closet at the last second. David raised his weapon, but the man turned, pressing the silencer against Sarah's head. Not a step closer, Whitmore. David stopped cold. You don't want to do this. The man's voice was flat. This isn't personal. It is to me, David said. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the emergency lights. Then, 2 quick shots from behind. The masked man jerked, his grip loosening. Nash stepped out of the shadows, rifle raised. Sarah tore free, running to David. Emma, she started, but David was already pulling her toward the storage closet. He opened the door, relief flooding him when Emma blinked up at him, unhurt. When the last intruder was down, Nash swept the perimeter twice, then locked the place down. They were pros, Nash said grimly. Not random muscle. Whoever sent them wasn't trying to scare you. David looked at the bodies. Gideon sent them. He's done playing. Sarah's voice was quiet but hard. Then so are we. David met her eyes, the red glow of the emergency light casting shadows across his face. No more safe houses. No more hiding. We take it to him. Nash nodded once. Then we're going to need more than a list. We're going to need proof that no one can deny. David glanced toward Emma, who was curled against Sarah. We get one shot at this. And if we miss... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Somewhere in the city, Gideon Rowe would already know the attack had failed. And he would be planning the next one. The rain came hard and fast that night, drumming against the tinted windows of the black SUV. Inside, David sat with his elbows on his knees, the city's neon lights flickering across his face. Nash was at the wheel, his eyes scanning every side street and overpass. This isn't a defensive run anymore, Nash said. Once we cross into his territory, there's no backup except what we bring. David's gaze didn't move from the rain-streaked glass. Then we bring enough. In the rear seat, Sarah checked the last of the gear. Encrypted comms, portable drives, a small case of high-density flash storage that could hold an entire government database. She'd insisted on coming, and after the attack at the safe house, David didn't have the heart or the arrogance to tell her no. The target wasn't Gideon Rowe's public office. Those were for show. The real nerve center was a private floor inside a luxury high-rise overlooking the river, officially unlisted, secure with biometric locks and armed staff who rotated every 48 hours. Getting in required more than just planning. It required bait. At 11:13 p.m., an anonymous message hit Gideon's secure comm line. We have the rest of the list. Meet in person, or it goes public. Attached was a fragment of data that could only have come from David's stolen tablet. Gideon took the bait. The high-rise lobby was a study in modern excess. Marble floors, chrome columns, glass elevators riding silently up the building's spine. The night guard barely glanced at David's forged ID before waving him through. Nash and Sarah were already moving ahead, blending into a group of late-night corporate types heading for the lifts. They reached the 40th floor without a hitch. The Real security began there, a retinal scanner, a pressure-sensitive hallway, 2 guards in plain clothes with the kind of posture that said ex-military. David let them check his ID, then the small briefcase in his hand. Inside was a decoy drive, loaded with nothing but scrambled noise. They waved him through. The private floor was quieter than expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city lights. Soft jazz hummed from hidden speakers. At the far end of the main room, Gideon Rowe stood with his back to them, hands clasped behind him. You're punctual, Gideon said without turning. David stepped forward. You wanted to see the rest of the list. I wanted to see you, Gideon corrected, finally turning. He looked rested, confident, even amused. You've been busy, embarrassing my friends, digging where you shouldn't, and yet you came here. Because I'm tired of your games, David said. Then let's stop pretending, Gideon replied. You have something I want. I have something you love. Neither of us walks away until the other gives it up. David's jaw tightened. You don't have her. Gideon's smile was faint. Don't I? He gestured toward a side door. One of his men opened it, revealing a dimly lit room beyond. Sarah stiffened. It wasn't Emma inside, but it was Keller, the investigative journalist David had given files to 2 weeks earlier. Her hands were bound, a bruise on her cheek. "You're running out of allies," Gideon said. "And when they're gone, you'll realize all you've done is make yourself very, very alone." Nash's voice came low through the comm in David's ear. 2 minutes until we trigger the uplink. Once it starts, it'll pull everything from his servers. We can't stop it." David kept his eyes on Gideon. "You still think this is about leverage?" "It's not." "What is it about then?" Gideon asked. David took a step closer. "It's about ending you before you can touch anyone else I care about." Gideon's eyes narrowed. Big words. But words don't matter without. The lights flickered. Gideon glanced toward the control panel, just as every screen in the room came alive, lines of code racing across them. "What did you do?" he demanded. David's voice was ice, leveling the field. The download began pulling every encrypted file from Gideon's network. Financials, contracts, communication logs. Nash's team outside the building intercepted the feed, duplicating it in real time to a dozen dead drop servers. Gideon lunged to the desk, but David stepped into his path. The two men collided, grappling for the briefcase. Sarah moved fast, grabbing Keller and dragging her toward the elevator. One of Gideon's guards reached for his weapon. Nash took him down with a precise elbow to the jaw. The download timer on the main screen hit 90%. "You think this stops me?" Gideon snarled, shoving David back. "It doesn't stop you," David said. "It erases you." The final percentage ticked over. The uplink ended. Every file now existed beyond Gideon's reach. They didn't wait for the fallout. Keller, shaken but alive, followed Sarah into the service elevator, Nash covering their exit. David was the last to leave, pausing only once to look back at Gideon, who stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by blank screens and the first true flicker of uncertainty David had ever seen in his eyes. The doors closed. Down in the lobby, rain-slick streets waited outside. They moved fast, disappearing into the night. But David knew this wasn't over. Men like Gideon didn't break in one night. They cracked slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. Tonight was just the first fracture, and in the morning, the war would enter its final phase. By the time dawn broke over the skyline, the first waves had already hit. David stood in his penthouse office, watching the city come alive under a new kind of storm, not of rain, but of headlines. Every major news network was running the story. Whistleblower leak exposes corporate and political conspiracy. It was everywhere: print, broadcast, social feeds. Names, dates, wire transfers, voice logs. The data uplink from Gideon's servers hadn't just been sent to dead drop vaults. It had gone straight to a coalition of journalists who'd been waiting years for something like this. On the floor below, Nash's team worked 3 phones at once, fielding calls from allies, legal teams, and reporters who wanted David on record. Sarah stayed close to Emma, steering her away from the TV. "This is it, isn't it?" she asked when David came downstairs. "This is how he falls." David's answer was cautious. "It's how he starts to fall. But men like Gideon don't go quietly. He's going to lash out before he's done." Nash joined them, holding a secure tablet. "You're both right. We just intercepted chatter from one of his remaining loyalists. Gideon's lost access to most of his accounts. He's cut off in 3 countries, frozen out in 2 more. But he still has enough cash and enough people to make trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Sarah asked. Nash hesitated. "The kind you can't fix with PR." By midday, the first counterpunch landed. A different video hit the news feeds. Grainy footage of David, years ago, in a war-torn region overseas. The angle and lighting made it look like he was handing a case of money to armed men. The voiceover claimed it was payment for targeted removals. Sarah saw the raw pain in David's eyes as he watched. "It's a fabrication," he said. "Half the video isn't even from the same year." "It doesn't matter," Nash replied. "He's not trying to win in court. He's trying to poison you, so no one cares if you go down." By late afternoon, Gideon's empire was fracturing in real time. A former business partner went on record, flipping sides to save himself. 2 politicians named in the leak announced sudden resignations. But it was the third move of the day that froze the air in David's lungs. Nash rushed in, eyes hard. "We've got a problem." Emma's school sent an alert. Someone tried to access her records, digital and physical. The only reason they didn't get them is because your security protocols were still active. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. He's going after her directly. David was already moving for his coat. Not just going after her. He's building a path to her. School records, medical files, anything that makes her vulnerable. Then we take her somewhere he can't reach, Sarah said. There's nowhere he can't reach, David replied grimly. Not until he's gone. That night, they moved Emma again, this time to a location even Nash's closest allies didn't know about. A private airfield outside the city, a jet fueled and waiting. Sarah strapped Emma into her seat. Try and keep her voice light. It's just a little trip, okay? Like an adventure. Emma looked between them, picking up more than they thought. Is the bad man going to find me? David crouched to her level. Not if I find him first. Half an hour later, the plane's engines were spooling up when Nash's comm crackled to life. Incoming vehicle on the perimeter, moving fast. David's head snapped toward the runway. In the distance, 2 black SUVs tore across the tarmac, headlights cutting through the dark. Get her in the air, David barked. Sarah grabbed Emma, buckling her in tight as the jet's engines roared louder. Nash moved toward the stairs, rifle ready. One of the SUVs skidded sideways, blocking the far end of the runway. The second kept coming. David sprinted toward it, his sidearm up. The SUV braked hard, doors flying open. Gideon wasn't inside. Instead, 3 armed men spilled out, moving with military precision toward the plane. The fight was fast, brutal, and too close for comfort. David and Nash took the first 2 down in the open, but the third made it to the stairs of the jet before David tackled him hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. Sarah's voice carried over the engines. We have to go. David yanked the man's weapon away, dropping him with a single blow. He turned back just in time to see the jet begin to roll forward. Through the cockpit glass, the pilot gave him a sharp nod. The plane picked up speed, leaving the tarmac and the threat behind. David stood on the runway, chest heaving, watching until the jet's lights vanished into the night sky. When Nash came up beside him, David's voice was low. Gideon just made his last mistake. Nash glanced at him. You sound sure. David's eyes were fixed on the horizon. Because now he's given me permission to finish this by any means necessary. Somewhere far above, Emma was safe, for now. And somewhere in the city, Gideon Rowe had just declared a war neither of them could walk away from alive. The warehouse was silent, except for the steady hum of servers. David stood in the dim blue light, staring at a live map of the city projected on the far wall. Every blinking red that represented one of Gideon Rowe's known safe locations. Nash walked in carrying 2 duffel bags. He dropped them with a heavy thud. Gears ready. Comms, weapons, the works. David didn't take his eyes off the map. We hit all of them at once. No warning. No time for him to move assets. Nash crossed his arms. That means splitting our people. Risk goes way up. Not as much as waiting, David said. He's already tried for Emma twice. Next time, he won't send proxies. He'll come himself. We finish it before he gets a chance. From the corner, Sarah spoke. And if you don't come back? David turned to her. Then at least he never touches her again. The plan was simple on paper and impossible in reality. 4 teams, for simultaneous hits. Each location stripped of drives, cash, and leverage before Gideon could destroy it. But David wasn't leading just any hit team. He was going straight for Gideon's personal command center, an off-the-books facility hidden under a decommissioned shipping terminal. No public record. No legal existence. The kind of place where people could vanish without anyone asking questions. They moved at 2:14 a.m., under the cover of fog rolling in from a river. Nash's team took the rear approach, jamming comms and cutting exterior cameras. David led the forward entry, stepping through rusted cargo doors into darkness that smelled of oil and salt water. The first 2 guards went down fast. Tranquilizers, not bullets. David wanted no alarms until they were already too deep for Gideon to run. A steel staircase led them into the bowels of the terminal. Down here, the air was colder, the light harsher. And at the center of it all, glass walls, banks of servers, and Gideon Rowe himself, standing with a tumbler of whiskey in one hand like he'd been expecting them. "You've made yourself hard to ignore, Whitmore," Gideon said, his voice echoing in the metal chamber. David stepped forward, weapon at his side. "That was the point." Gideon smirked. "You could have walked away, taken your little family, and disappeared. But you just had to play the hero." "I'm not here to play anything," David said. "I'm here to erase you." From the corner of his eye, David caught movement. 2 armed men flanking the servers. Nash's voice came quietly through the comm. 3 more outside the glass. "Your call." David didn't hesitate. "Now!" The room exploded into motion. Flashbangs, the crash of shattering glass, shouts. In seconds, Nash's team had the guards down and the servers under their control. Gideon didn't move. "You think taking my toys away changes anything?" David stepped closer. "It changes everything." The extraction of data was surgical. In under 4 minutes, every byte from Gideon's core systems was mirrored onto David's encrypted drives. Offshore accounts, blackmail caches, operation logs. Everything that made Gideon untouchable was now in David's hands. Nash gave a low whistle. This is the whole spine of his empire. He's done. But David didn't look relieved. His eyes stayed locked on Gideon. "Where's the backup?" Gideon's smirk returned. "Even if I told you, you'd never get to it in time." David's voice was cold. "Try me?" It was Sarah's voice that broke through the comms, sharp and urgent. "David, we got movement at the airfield." "It's him." He sent a second team. "They're after Emma." David's blood ran cold. He turned to Nash. "Get this data out of here. Now." "What about you?" "I'm going to end this." The confrontation turned in an instant. Gideon tried to step back toward the server wall, but David closed the distance, slamming him against the glass. "You've run out of shadows to hide in," David said through clenched teeth. Gideon's voice was low, almost amused. "And you've run out of time." David's fist tightened around the front of his jacket. "Not for you." Then he drove Gideon forward into the glass hard enough to crack it. Alarms began to wail, silent until now, triggered by structural breach. Nash grabbed the drives and moved for the exit. They pulled out in under 2 minutes, leaving Gideon's men scrambling in chaos. But David didn't feel the rush of victory. Not yet. Not while Emma was still in play. As they sped toward the airfield, Nash glanced over. "If he's touching her..." "He won't," David said, his voice like steel. "Because I'm ending this tonight." The city lights blurred past the windows. Somewhere ahead, the final move was waiting, and David Whitmore was ready to cut the head off the snake for good. The airfield was lit like a battlefield. Searchlights swept over hangars, long shadows stretching across the tarmac. David's SUV skidded to a stop just beyond the chain-link perimeter. Nash was already out of the driver's seat, scanning the scene with binoculars. "She's here," Nash said grimly. "North hangar. 2 guards at the main door, and I can see Gideon's personal driver on the far side." David's pulse was steady now, not from calm, but from focus. "Then he's inside." They moved fast, slipping through a gap in the fence. The wind carried the faint hum of an idling jet somewhere beyond the hangars. David's mind painted the scenario. Gideon using the chaos of the night to get Emma out of the country, beyond reach, leverage in a future he could rebuild. Not tonight. The first guard went down without a sound, Nash's chokehold dropping him to the cold asphalt. David handled the second, dragging him behind a crate. They breached the hangar door together. Inside, the air smelled of jet fuel and coal metal. A sleek black Gulfstream sat on the tarmac just beyond the open hangar doors. It steps down, its engine spooling at idle. And at the foot of the stairs, Gideon Rowe, holding Emma by the wrist. "David," Gideon called, his voice carrying in the cavernous space. "Right on time." Emma's eyes were wide, her cheeks streaked with tears. "Daddy!" she cried, trying to pull free. David stepped forward, every muscle locked. "Let her go." Gideon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "She's just insurance. You walk away, and she lives a life untouched by all this. Stay, and she becomes collateral. Sarah's voice came sharp through the calm. David, he's lying. He won't let her go either way. David kept his gaze locked on Gideon. You've already lost. Your network's gone. Your money's frozen. The only thing you have left is the choice of how this ends. Gideon's grip on Emma tightened. And you think you're the one who decides that? The standoff stretched, seconds feeling like hours. Then Nash's voice came low in David's earpiece. 2 shooters on the catwalks. I can take them, but you need to keep him still. David's mind shifted gears instantly. On my mark. He took a slow step forward. You spent your whole life hiding behind power you didn't earn, behind other people's fear. But here's the truth, Gideon. When it's just you and the man who's coming for you, you've got nothing. Something in Gideon's eyes flickered, rage, or maybe the first hint of doubt. Mark, David whispered. The shots were near silent, 2 soft whips, and the shooters on the catwalks crumpled. Gideon jerked at the sound, and in that fraction of a second, David was moving. He closed the distance in 3 strides, tearing Emma from Gideon's grasp and shoving her behind him. Gideon swung wildly. The 2 men collided with a force that rattled the hangar floor. They fought like men with nothing to lose, grappling, striking, each blow heavier than the last. Gideon landed a punch that split David's lip. David drove a knee into Gideon's ribs, forcing the air from his lungs. It ended with David pinning him against a steel stair rail, one hand locked around the front of his jacket. This, David said, breathing hard, is where you stop. Gideon sneered, even through the blood at the corner of his mouth. You can't kill me. You're not that man. David's eyes were cold. No, but I can make sure you never see daylight again. By the time the federal response team arrived, tipped off by Nash with a preloaded evidence package, Gideon Rowe was in restraints, his jet grounded, and every shred of his leverage gone. David stayed only long enough to see him loaded into the armored transport. Gideon caught his eye one last time, but the smile was gone. On the edge of the tarmac, Sarah held Emma close. David walked to them, his steps heavy with exhaustion but lighter than they'd been in months. Emma reached out for him. Daddy, are we safe now? David knelt, brushing a tear from her cheek. Yes, sweetheart, we're safe now. But in his mind, he knew safety was never permanent. It had to be earned every day. Tonight, at least, they'd earned it. The headlines came first. Gideon Rowe arrested in multi-nation corruption probe. Blackmail empire crumbles as evidence surfaces. Insiders cooperate in exchange for immunity. For days, the news cycle spun with speculation, leaks, and the inevitable flood of opportunists claiming they'd always suspected Gideon's guilt. Federal prosecutors called it the most comprehensive dismantling of a corporate political criminal network in decades. David read none of it in full. The fight was over, at least the part anyone would ever see. In the weeks that followed, the pieces of their lives began to settle. Emma was back in school, laughing with friends like the shadow of the last months had never touched her. Sarah started sketching again, the old leather-bound notebook filling with charcoal lines and watercolor splashes. David took to working from home more often. The old restlessness was still there, but it was tempered now, shaped into something quieter. The war room was gone. In its place, a small study lined with books and warm light. One afternoon, Sarah found him there, staring out the window. You're thinking too much, she said softly. He smiled faintly, just adjusting to quiet. The quiet didn't mean the world was safe. Nash reminded him of that when they met for coffee one rainy morning. Gideon's gone, but there are always others. Nash said, different names, same games. David sipped his coffee. Then we deal with them when they come. Nash studied him for a moment. You're not walking away completely, are you? David's answer was a slow smile. You know me better than that. 3 months after Gideon's arrest, the trial began. David wasn't called to testify. He didn't need to be. The evidence they'd pulled from the shipping terminal was airtight, corroborated by multiple witnesses and digital forensics. Gideon sat in the courtroom, looking smaller than David remembered. No expensive suit could hide the fact that he'd been broken. When the verdict came, guilty on all major counts, David didn't feel triumph, just a certainty that the man would never walk free again. That night, back home, David found Em in the backyard, chasing fireflies in the soft summer dark. Sarah sat on the porch steps, watching her with a smile. David joined her. She's going to be all right. Sarah leaned into him. We all are. For a while, they sat in silence, the sound of the evening wrapping around them like a blanket. The sky above was clear, scattered with stars. Emma ran back to them, cupping her hands around a glowing firefly. Look, she said, opening her fingers so they could see. David smiled. Make a wish. She thought for a moment, then whispered it so quietly only she could hear, before letting the firefly drift away into the night. Later, as they tucked her in, Emma caught David's hand. You didn't let the bad man win. David kissed her forehead. Not then. Not ever. When the lights were out and the house was still, David stood at the window, watching the moonlight spill across the yard. The storm was over, for now, and in that fragile, precious calm, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they had found something close to peace.